Some of the most impossible places on Earth are not where you expect. They are not always the most dangerous. Not always the hardest to reach. But they change the way the world feels. In Japan, beyond the cities and familiar images, the land begins to shift. Coastlines open into quiet coves. Forests thicken over volcanic ground. And narrow paths lead into places that feel almost unreal. Here, distance is not measured in kilometers, but in time, weather, and attention. Some landscapes don't announce themselves. They reveal slowly. And the further you move, the less the map seems to matter. This is a journey through a side of Japan most people never see, where the ordinary becomes unfamiliar, and the world feels quietly, unmistakably different. Ishigaki Island feels like Japan's subtropical edge, where sugarcane fields give way to jungle ridgelines and quiet coves. On Ishigaki Island, Okinawa, Japan, the pace slows quickly once you leave the small port streets behind. On the north side, Fukido's Mangrove Creek slides under low bridges, and the air turns brackish and green. Farther on, a short walk near Hirakubozaki opens to wind-shaped grass and a wide horizon of sea. Getting around is easiest with a small rental car, since buses thin out beyond town, and many trailheads aren't signed prominently. Getting connected is straightforward here. Local SIMs and eSIMs are common, and Wi-Fi shows up reliably in modest guest houses and cafes. Along the west coast, Kibira's viewpoints look down on boats resting in calm shallows, while nearby beaches stay low-key outside peak hours. At Yonehara, tide and wind decide whether the shore is a snorkeler's window or a quiet line of foam. What lingers most on Ishigaki is the shallow coral reef lagoon at Kibira Bay, turning the water a pale opaque turquoise just beyond the dark reef line. Kabira Bay feels like a quiet inlet on Ishigaki, where the shoreline curves gently and the air carries salt and warm green scents. In Kabira Bay, Okinawa, Japan, the water shifts from pale jade to deeper teal with the passing clouds. Low hills cradle the bay, and small beaches appear between rock and vegetation, more observed than occupied. The soundscape is soft, oars, distant engines, and wind moving through coastal trees. Glass-bottom boats drift across the shallows, letting you look down without disturbing the reef beneath. From the viewing decks along the road, the same scene changes hour by hour, depending on tide and sunlight. It's usually straightforward to stay in Ishigaki City and visit by bus, taxi, or a short rental car drive, especially if you settle your booking a night ahead. Mobile coverage is reliable around town, and cafes often have simple Wi-Fi for checking maps and ferry times. Nearby, the Yaeyama landscape keeps its scale human. Small farms, local markets, and quiet side roads that lead back to the coast. Even when the day is bright, shaded paths and brief rain showers keep the heat from feeling sharp. Late afternoon thins the crowds, and the bay becomes mostly color and reflection, edged by dark green. Fishing boats and tour craft sit lightly on the surface, then slip away. What stays with you is the bay's translucent turquoise water, clear enough to reveal coral patterns just beneath the surface. Naminue Shrine sits close to the sea, holding its place in the everyday rhythm of Okinawa. Here at Naminue Shrine, Okinawa, Japan, the sacred and the coastal landscape meet without fanfare. A short walk brings you from city streets into a quieter space of stone steps, lanterns, and filtered shade. Even with Naha nearby, the air carries salt and the faint, steady hiss of surf. The shrine's roots reach back to the old Ryukyu Kingdom, when ocean travel shaped local life. Sailors and fishermen came to pray for safe passage, reading weather and currents as carefully as any map. Today, visitors pause at the cleansing basin, then move toward the main hall with small offerings and bowed heads. The sounds are simple: coins, soft footsteps, and a breeze moving through coastal trees. Okinawa's island character is felt in the details: shrine ropes dampened by sea air, bright sunlight, and a horizon never far away. Below, Naminui Beach glows between rocks, and the water shifts from green to deep blue. What stays with you is the pale limestone cliff under the shrine, dropping straight to sand and wave-washed stone. Nami no Ue Beach rests at the edge of Naha, where city streets give way to a small pocket of sand and bright water. In Nami no Ue Beach, Okinawa, Japan, the shoreline feels surprisingly intimate for a place surrounded by everyday life. A short walkway brings you down between sea walls, and the sound of traffic fades into the rhythm of small waves. Even on busy days, the cove keeps its own scale, contained and calm. Offshore, shallow reef and stone ledges temper the surf, shaping gentle currents and clear, shifting blues. The tide quietly changes the beach's width, leaving wet sand that mirrors the sky for a moment before it dries. Above the waterline, Okinawa's history is close at hand, tied to the old Ryukyu tradition of sea-facing prayer. Visitors climb nearby steps, pausing at the shrine to look out across the harbor and the open Pacific beyond it. Down on the sand, families wade in the shallows while locals linger at the edges, watching the light move across the surface. The scene is simple, but never still, as wind and tide redraw the same view. What sets Nami no Beach apart is the limestone cliff rising directly over the cove, crowned by Naminui Shrine, its colors visible above the water's quiet line. Okinawa World sits on the southern end of Okinawa Island, where the pace of the Ryukyu chain feels far from mainland routines. Here, distance is measured less in miles than in dialect, music, and weathered stone. At Okinawa World, Okinawa, Japan, the landscape quickly turns inward into Gyokusendo Cave, a long corridor of limestone shaped by patient water. The air cools, the light softens, and the floor gleams with mineral damp. Along the walkway, stalactites hang in dense clusters, while stalagmites build upward like slow architecture. Pools collect beneath them, reflecting amber lamps and the cave's natural shadows. Back above ground, a recreated Ryukyu village frames everyday crafts, glasswork, weaving, and earthy pottery fired in traditional kilns. Isanshin melodies drift between low roofs, and the scent of sugarcane sweets follows visitors through open courtyards. Elsewhere in the park, Okinawa's relationship with nature shows its practical side, from habu snake exhibits to gardens that thrive in subtropical humidity. Even the stone walls and tiled eaves seem built for wind and salt. In the end, the defining presence of Okinawa world is Gyokusendo's limestone chamber, thousands of dripstone formations, beaded with water, turning silence into something you can almost see. Gyokusendo Cave sits quietly beneath Okinawa's green hills, where Japan thins into its southern island chain. The air at the entrance already feels cooler and heavier with moisture. Inside Gyokusendo Cave, Okinawa, Japan, limestone corridors bend and narrow, then open into chambers softened by mineral deposits. Light catches on wet stone, turning the walls into muted grays and honey tones. The cave's path follows an underground stream, and the sound of water arrives before you see it. Drip by drip, calcium-rich water leaves behind new layers, slowly building columns, curtains, and delicate straws. Some formations gather in dense clusters, like a stone garden grown in darkness. Others hang alone, thin and translucent, with droplets poised at their tips. Above ground, Okinawa's villages and sugarcane fields feel close, yet the cave carries the deeper time of the Ryukyu limestone. It's a reminder that these islands are shaped as much from below as from the sea winds above. For travelers, it's usually straightforward to stay nearby in Naha or around Nanjo, with a range of simple hotels and guest houses if you book ahead. Mobile service is generally reliable on the drive, and most accommodations offer dependable Wi-Fi for planning the next day. What lingers most here is the sheer concentration of stalactites, thousands of pale points overhead, each one fed by the same steady, patient drip. Valley of Gangala feels like a quiet pocket of Okinawa, where time moves a little slower beneath the trees. Here in Valley of Gangala, Okinawa, Japan, the ground tells its story through limestone and shade. This landscape began as a limestone cave, then gradually opened as the ceiling collapsed, leaving a long, sheltered corridor. Ferns, palms, and twisting trunks take advantage of the cool air that lingers close to the rock. On guided walks, visitors follow narrow paths past dripstone walls and shallow hollows where water gathers after rain. The sounds are modest: footsteps on damp soil, insects in the canopy, and the occasional call of a bird. Archaeologists have found traces of early human life in this part of southern Okinawa, linking the valley to deep prehistory in Japan's Ryukyu Islands. That sense of age sits comfortably beside today's careful access and preservation. Even when the sun is bright outside, the valley stays dim and green, with light arriving in thin beams through leaves. The air carries the scent of wet stone, and the temperature feels steadier than the open coast. Most distinctive is the way banyan roots hang and braid across the exposed limestone cave walls, forming a living curtain over the walkway. Cape Manzamo sits on Okinawa's west coast, where the island's everyday pace gives way to open wind and sea. The name is often translated as a field for 10,000 to sit, a clue to the wide, grassy headland underfoot. From this point, in Cape Manzamo, Okinawa, Japan, the East China Sea stretches out in long bands of blue, and the horizon feels unusually close. Below the cliff edge, waves work steadily at pale limestone, polishing it the way they have for centuries. Okinawa's subtropical climate softens the light, and the coast can shift from clear to hazy in minutes. On calmer days, the water turns transparent near the rocks, hinting at coral life beyond the surf line. Reaching the Cape is uncomplicated, although some coastal routes can include narrow shoulders and dangerous roads after heavy rain. Getting connected is straightforward here. eSIMs work well, and Wi-Fi is common in small hotels and cafes around Honor Village. Locals and visitors pause at the fenced viewpoints, letting the wind set the tempo while seabirds track the shoreline. Even in a busy season, the soundscape stays spare: gusts, foam, and distant engines. What lingers most is the elephant-shaped limestone formation at the cliff's edge, its trunk carved cleanly by wave and weather into a single, unmistakable silhouette. Cape Maeda sits on the western edge of Okinawa, where the East China Sea meets a low shelf of limestone. The headland feels far from Japan's big city tempo, even with roads and resorts not far away. Here at Cape Maeda, Okinawa, Japan, the coast is shaped by porous rock, salt spray, and steady wind. Small tide pools collect in the shallows, and the waterline shifts quickly with the seasons. Just inland, the village of Honor keeps a working rhythm. Morning traffic, family plots, and the quiet infrastructure that supports visitors. From Naha, it's an easy drive, yet the sea makes it feel like a separate world. Below the cliff, divers and snorkelers enter through narrow channels cut into the reef. In clear weather, coral heads, sea urchins, and striped fish show themselves with a clarity that rewards patience. The cape's surface is rough underfoot, pitted and sharp, with weathered grooves that hold rainwater after sudden squalls. On calmer days, the horizon stays low and wide, and sound carries from the shoreline. Beneath the headland, Cape Maeda's blue cave is its defining detail, a low arched chamber where sunlight reflects off pale rock and turns the water an unmistakable luminous blue. Ryukyu sits in the subtropical south of Japan, where island life feels a long way from the mainland's pace. In Ryukyu, Okinawa, Japan, the past is arranged as a walkable village of restored homes and workshops. Stone walls edge narrow paths, and hibiscus leans over gates worn smooth by visitors' hands. The air carries a mix of wood smoke, damp earth, and the saltiness that never quite leaves Okinawa. Inside the houses, the details do the talking. Woven mats, low beams, and shaded rooms designed for long, humid summers. Craftspeople demonstrate dyeing, weaving, and small trades that once anchored everyday survival across the Ryukyu Islands. Music and movement appear without fanfare. Sanshin strings, a drum beat, a few steps of Isa, then fade back into conversation. And on a planet obsessed with speed and world-dangerous roads, the attention here shifts to patient hands and practiced routines. Even the landscaping feels intentional, with coral stone borders and pockets of cool shade between buildings. It's an easy place to notice how architecture, weather, and community were once tightly stitched together. The most distinctive sight remains the red-tiled roofs, each watched over by a Shisa guardian perched at the ridge, still and alert in the Okinawan light. Okinawa Chirome Aquarium sits along the northern coast of Okinawa, where the islands of Japan stretch far from the country's main centers. Here, the sea feels close, constant, and quietly authoritative. At Okinawa Churaumi Aquarium, Okinawa, Japan, the approach passes through Ocean Expo Park, with subtropical greenery and salty wind moving in from the East China Sea. Even before the exhibits, the landscape sets a slow, coastal tempo. Inside, the story begins in the shallows, reef fish, living corals, and the intricate shapes that thrive in warm, clear water. Labels trace currents, seasons, and the delicate boundary between sunlit lagoons and deeper slopes. Further on, darker tanks hold creatures adapted to pressure and dimness, their movements measured and economical. And the aquarium's design favors long pauses, letting visitors watch without feeling hurried. Outside again, the air carries the sound of surf, and the surrounding coastline hints at why Okinawa has long been defined by the sea more than by roads. Distance from mainland Japan becomes something you can sense. The most distinctive sight remains the Kuroshio sea tank's immense acrylic window, where whale sharks and manta rays glide past like slow weather in blue water. Ocean Expo Park sits on the Motobu Peninsula, where Okinawa's subtropical light meets a wide, open horizon. In Ocean Expo Park, Okinawa, Japan, the pace feels unhurried, shaped by sea air and long views across the East China Sea. The park was built around the legacy of the 1975 World Exposition, and it still carries that spacious public works confidence. Broad lawns, shaded paths, and coastal overlooks give the day a gentle rhythm between walking and simply stopping to look. At the Okinawa Churaumi Aquarium, the story turns to the offshore reefs and deeper currents that circle these islands. Exhibits move from coral shallows to open water, with details that reward slow reading and quiet attention. Outside, and the sea turtle pool and the manatee exhibits keep the focus on care and continuity rather than spectacle. Nearby beaches and rocky edges show how quickly sand gives way to reef and tide-worn stone. Most visitors find it easy to arrive by rental car or bus from Naha, and the parking areas are straightforward once you're on the peninsula. Mobile reception is generally reliable, and a local SIM or eSIM helps with maps when exploring the northern coast. What lingers most is the aquarium's Kuroshio sea tank, a single immense pane of glass holding blue depth, slow light, and the quiet glide of whale sharks and manta rays. Bis Fukugi Tree Road feels like a quiet corridor set apart from the busier edges of Okinawa. On the Motobu Peninsula, the pace slows to footsteps and bicycle wheels. In Bis Fukugi Tree Road, Okinawa, Japan, centuries-old Fukugi trees line narrow lanes that once sheltered a coastal village from typhoons. Their trunks stand close to low stone walls, some built from coral limestone gathered nearby. Between the trees, small homes and gardens appear briefly, then slip back behind green. Even in midday, the light arrives softened, broken into moving patches that track the wind. Not far away, the Okinawa coastline opens to pale sand and clear shallows, and the road seems to guide you back and forth between shade and sea. Local life stays understated. Mailboxes, potted plants, and the hush of scooters passing at a respectful speed. What lingers most is the continuous Fukugi canopy overhead, a living roof that casts cool, dappled shade the entire length of the lane. Sesoko Beach sits on the western edge of a small island just off Okinawa's Motobu Peninsula, reached by a short bridge that feels longer than it looks. The air carries salt, sun-warmed sand, and the faint green of coastal forest. At Sesoko Beach, Okinawa, Japan, the shoreline curves in a calm crescent, sheltered from open swells by the island's shape and nearby reef. On clear days, the horizon looks close enough to measure, yet the quiet makes it feel far away. Arrive early with folding chairs and simple lunches, timing their visits with the tide tables posted around town. When the water is high, swimmers drift over seagrass patches. When it pulls back, the beach widens and the shallows turn into a study of ripples and light. From the sand, and you can see fishing boats threading between reef breaks and farther inland, small lanes leading to citrus trees and low houses. Even in Okinawa's busier season, the island pace holds steady and unhurried. Kuri Bridge begins on northern Okinawa and carries you out over the sea with a simple, unhurried line. Here at Kuri Bridge, Okinawa, Japan, the distance feels less like miles and more like a pause between shores. Nearly 2 kilometers long, the span stays low to the water, so the horizon remains wide and open. On clear days, reef patterns show through the surface like brushstrokes beneath glass. Before the bridge opened in 2005, the crossing depended on a small ferry and the day's conditions. Now the drive is steady, and the wind, salt, warm, and persistent, does most of the talking. On Kuri Island, narrow roads pass modest homes, small fields, and tucked-away beaches where locals come and go without ceremony. In season, a roadside stands sell Okinawan fruit and cold drinks to travelers who linger a little longer than planned. Cape Hedo sits at the far northern tip of Okinawa's main island, where the road narrows and the horizon feels suddenly wider. Here at Cape Hedo, Okinawa, Japan, the air carries salt and a steady, patient wind. Drive north passes into Yanbaru, a forested region where the canopy closes in and small settlements appear in brief clearings. Even in daylight, the pace slows, less traffic, fewer signs, more time to watch the landscape change. On the headland, subtropical plants cling to shallow soil, and seabirds use the updrafts as if they were built-in paths. Looking back toward Kunigami, the hills stack in soft layers, green against a brighter sky. A modest memorial and viewing area mark the point, understated, beside the scenery. People arrive quietly, check the wind, and scan the sea, as though the cape sets its own volume level. Yanbaru National Park sits in the forested north of Okinawa Island, where roads narrow and the air stays softly humid. In Yanbaru National Park, Okinawa, Japan, the map feels less like a grid and more like a green expanse. Here, subtropical broadleaf trees crowd close, and vines and giant ferns fill the understory. After rain, the scent of wet soil and camellia leaves lingers along the trail edges. Small rivers slip over limestone and dark basalt, gathering into clear pools before turning toward the East China Sea. At Hiji Falls and along quieter stream beds, water sounds become the park's steady background. Villages in Kunigami keep a low profile, with modest cafes, local produce stands, and signs pointing to trailheads. The pace is unhurried, shaped by weather, daylight, and the long distances between stops. For travelers, it's usually easiest to base yourself in northern Okinawa around Nago or Kunigami, where simple guest houses are common. Mobile coverage is generally reliable on main roads, and Wi-Fi is often available at lodging, even when the forest feels far away. As evening settles, one presence defines Yanbaru most clearly. The Yanbaru Quina, Okinawa's flightless rail, moving through leaf litter with quick, deliberate steps. Its dry, tapping calls carry briefly, then fade back into the trees. Hiji Falls sits deep in the Yanbaru forests at the northern edge of Okinawa Island, where the road narrows and the air turns noticeably cooler. In Japan's southern islands, this corner can feel far from the familiar pace of the mainland. Known locally as Hiji Otaki, Hiji Falls, Okinawa, Japan is reached by a well-kept trail that follows a clear stream through dense subtropical green. Along the way, cicadas and bright forest birds fill the gaps between footfalls. The hike is modest but varied, with wooden steps, damp roots, and short stretches where the forest closes in overhead. Small cascades appear and disappear beside the path, hinting at what's ahead. Most visitors base themselves in simple guest houses around Kunigami village, and then drive up early to find easy parking before the day warms. Mobile data is usually straightforward with a local SIM or eSIM, and Wi-Fi is common enough for checking trail updates. After rain, the stream runs louder and the rocks turn slick, so slow footing matters more than speed. Even on bright days, shade and spray keep the final stretch comfortably cool. As part of a protected landscape, the area is quietly managed, with clear signs asking hikers to stay on the walkway and carry out trash. The forest here feels intact, not staged. At the end, The waterfall's most distinctive feature is its smooth, pale curtain of fresh water sliding over dark rock into a small, green basin sheltered by thick ferns and broadleaf canopy. Katsuren Castle ruins sat on a narrow ridge above the Katsuren Peninsula, where the sea wind carries salt across old stone. From here, the horizon feels close enough to measure by cloud shadow. At Katsuren Castle ruins, Okinawa, Japan, the remains trace the era of the Ryukyu Kingdom, when island lords managed trade, tribute, and uneasy alliances. The site's height offered watchfulness without needing grand scale. The walk follows gentle slopes and sudden steps, with viewpoints opening toward the Pacific and the sheltered waters of Nakagusuku Bay. Even on calm days, you sense how quickly weather can change this coastline. Interpretive signs and low foundations outline courtyards and gates, hinting at ceremony as much as defense. Japan has many castles, but Okinawa's Gususuku sites feel closer to the land's textures than to later military showmanship. Remote islands often gather stories about dangerous places, yet what stands out here is patience. Stones set, reset, and endured. The ruin reads like a long conversation between human planning and typhoon seasons. What stays with you most is the terraced coral limestone walling, stacked in pale, rough courses that still hold their curve along the ridge. Hamahiga Island sits just off the eastern coast of Okinawa, linked to the mainland by a low road that skims shallow water. The drive feels like leaving the noise behind one lane at a time. On Hamahiga Island, Okinawa, Japan, small houses and gardens gather close to narrow streets, and the pace is measured by bicycles and footsteps. Even the air seems softened by salt and warm humidity. Along the shore, seawalls give way to pockets of sand and rough coral stone, with fishing boats resting in quiet inlets. At low tide, the shallows turn glassy and pale, showing seagrass and rippled flats. A short climb inland brings simple paths through subtropical trees, where cicadas and wind take turns filling the silence. Here, local shrines sit without spectacle and tended more by habit than ceremony. The island's history lives in places named softly on small signs, tied to Ryukyuan origin stories that still shape Okinawan faith. Visitors slow down naturally, reading, listening, and moving on without much to say. Near the forest edge, the Shiromichu limestone cave stays cool and dim, a hollow in the rock with a small altar tucked inside. It's that shaded stone mouth, quiet against the bright Okinawan coast, that lingers longest. Naha Maihama Beach sits on the southwest coast of Miyako-jima, where Okinawa's outer islands feel a world apart from Japan's busier shores. The light here has a soft clarity, even on overcast days. At Naha Maihama Beach, Okinawa, Japan, the shoreline stretches in a long, gentle curve, with shallow water that stays calm when the wind is mild. Offshore, coral reefs help settle the waves, leaving broad bands of turquoise over pale sand. Fishermen and families share the same open view, and the beach's wide flats make low tide easy to read with the eye. In summer, the sea turns warmer and brighter. In winter, steady breezes bring a cooler, drier feel across the dunes. Small cafes and beach facilities sit back from the waterline, keeping the foreground uncluttered. It's usually simple to find guest houses around Miyako-jima, and most travelers rely on a rental car with pocket Wi-Fi or an eSIM working well across town. Evenings come quietly, with the sun dropping toward the distant line of Irabujima and the sand taking on a faint pink cast. Footprints last only until the next tide smooths them away. What stays most distinctive is the beach's seemingly endless ribbon of powder-white sand, so fine and bright that the shallow water above it looks almost luminous. Tsunayama Beach sits on Miyako-jima, one of Okinawa's far-flung islands, where the pace is set by ferry schedules and shifting light off the sea. Here, Japan feels pared down to sand, limestone, and wind. The approach is part of the place. A short walk over a soft dune, the grains warm underfoot and streaked by footprints that vanish quickly. Beyond the crest, the water opens in layered blues, changing with every cloud. Locals come in the calmer hours, when the tide is gentle and the shore is wide enough for quiet conversation. On rougher days, the surf writes a different soundtrack, and visitors read the shoreline like a weather report. Around Miyako-jima, daily life leans on the sea, fishing harbors, simple beach cafes, and roads lined with sugarcane. Even so, this pocket of coast keeps a sense of distance, as if the island is briefly holding its breath. The sand here is unusually fine, almost powdery, and it reflects the sun back into the air. In the shallows, pale coral, rubble, and smooth stones mark where the reef begins. Most eyes settle, sooner or later, on the same detail: a natural rock arch at the edge of the beach, curving like a window and framing a slice of open ocean through its shaded hollow. Irabu Bridge stretches low across the sea, linking Miyako-jima to the quieter shores of Irabujima in Okinawa. Its long, steady line makes distance feel measurable, almost calm. Here, Irabu Bridge, Okinawa, Japan, sits on the outer edge of the Miyako Islands, where the horizon is mostly water and the wind carries salt instead of city noise. Even on clear days, the setting feels removed. Drivers ease onto the span and quickly learn there are no shops, no shade, and few places to stop, just open sky and a simple shoulder. The seabirds keep pace, hovering over the current. Local traffic is modest. Fishermen heading out before dawn, families moving between islands, and cyclists testing their legs against the crosswind. The bridge is modern, but the rhythm around it stays unhurried. Travel writing likes to chase extreme roads, dangerous places, yet this crossing asks for something quieter, attention to weather, visibility, and the steady patience of a long approach. A sudden squall can change the color of everything. From the center, boats look small as they pass over coral shallows, and the water's clarity reveals pale sandbars beneath. On the Irabu side, the coastline remains spare and low. What lingers most is the Miyako blue below the bridge, clear, bright water laid over coral patterns, shifting from turquoise to deep cobalt with each passing cloud. Yonehara Beach sits on Ishigaki Island, where Okinawa's outer Yaeyama chain feels far from Japan's main routes and schedules. The shoreline is quiet, edged by palms and low coastal forest. Here at Yonehara Beach, Okinawa, Japan, the sea changes quickly with the tide, shifting from pale turquoise to deeper blue beyond the reef. A few steps into the water can bring sudden depth and a stronger pull. Locals watch the conditions with a practiced eye, especially when seasonal winds roughen the surface. Visitors often come for snorkeling, but they learn to respect the flags, the currents, and the drop-offs. Reaching the beach is part of the island's tempo, a narrow coastal road, sugarcane fields, and intermittent views of the East China Sea. It's not one of those world-dangerous roads, but it asks for patience and attention. Inland, Ishigaki's hills hold small farms and streams that carry red soil after rain, tinting roadside ditches before the water clears again. Out here, weather can arrive fast, then pass just as cleanly. At the waterline, shells and coral fragments collect in thin bands, and the sand feels coarse underfoot. Even on calm days, the soundscape is mostly wind, surf, and distant birds. The beach's most distinctive feature is its fringing coral reef so close to shore that in clear shallows, branching coral heads can be seen from above like a living mosaic. Tsukuji Beach sits on the western side of Ishigaki Island, where Okinawa's subtropical light softens the shoreline into pale sand and muted turquoise. Here, distance feels measured less by miles than by the slower pace of the Yaeyama Islands. At Tsukuji Beach, Okinawa, Japan, the day often begins with still water and the low sound of palms shifting in the breeze. Across the island, small roads lead past sugarcane fields and modest homes, tying beach life to everyday routines. A short drive away, Kabira Bay is admired from its viewpoints, while ferries from Ishigaki connect to quieter neighbors like Taketomi and the wild greens of Iriomote. Even with these links, the edges of Okinawa can feel like Japan stretched thin across the sea. Tsukuji's shore is friendly to unhurried swimming, with broad shallows that invite wading more than waves. At dusk, the western horizon gives the beach an unforced calm, and footprints linger in sand that dries almost powder fine. It's usually easy to find reasonably priced hotels and guest houses around Ishigaki's main town if you book a night ahead, especially during holidays. Mobile service is generally reliable on the island, and many cafes and lodgings offer basic Wi-Fi. What sets Tsukuji apart is its reef-sheltered lagoon, a wide, shallow sheet of clear water that stays unusually gentle, turning the sea into something closer to a quiet, glassy pool. Taketomi Island feels close to modern Okinawa, yet it keeps the pace of an older Ryukyu village. A short ferry ride from Ishigaki brings you to a place where distances are measured by bicycles and footsteps. In Taketomi Island, Okinawa, Japan, low wooden homes sit behind coral stone walls, their red tile roofs watched over by small shisa figures. Hibiscus and bougainvillea spill into the lanes, and the air carries a faint mix of sea salt and sun-warmed stone. Many visitors move through the settlement by rental bike, while others choose a slow water buffalo cart, guided by a local voice and the soft creak of harness leather. Even without a schedule, the island's layout gently pulls you back toward the village center. At the shore, Kondoi Beach offers shallow, clear water, and the West Pier extends into a wide, bright horizon. On calm days, the reef tints the sea in bands of turquoise and glassy green. A short walk leads to Kaiji Beach, where tiny star sand grains hide among ordinary shells shaped by foraminifera from the surrounding reef. It's a small detail that makes the coastline feel unusually intimate. What stays with you most are the village roads themselves, pale, hand-swept sand laid like a quiet carpet between coral walls, holding the day's light long after the sun starts to lower. Kondoi Beach sits quietly on Taketomi Island, where Okinawa's Yaeyama chain begins to feel like the edge of Japan. The air is soft with sea salt, and the pace slows to match the tide. Here at Kondoi Beach, Okinawa, Japan, the shoreline curves in a gentle arc, protected from harsh surf by surrounding reefs. Even on bright days, the scene stays understated. Simple sand, clear water, and a low horizon. A short ride away, Taketomi's village lanes are lined with coral stone walls and traditional roofs, cared for with patient routine. Water buffalo carts still pass at an unhurried tempo, as if the island is keeping time for itself. Out on the beach, families wade far from shore because the sea remains shallow long after your feet leave the dry sand. The light shifts from pale jade to turquoise, a gradient so clean it feels almost edited, though it's simply this part of the planet. From nearby Ishigaki, ferries bring day visitors, yet the wide, open water keeps the mood spacious. By late afternoon, the wind eases and the sun lowers toward Iriomote's distant silhouette. What stays with you is the tidal flat, an unusually broad, shallow sheet of glassy water that lets people walk out into the lagoon as if the sea has paused. Kume Island sits west of Okinawa's main island, where the air carries salt and sugarcane, and the pace feels measured by tides rather than traffic. On Kume Island, Okinawa, Japan, small fishing harbors and low stone walls frame everyday life, with Shisa guardians watching over gates and rooftops. Inland, farms and wooded ridges give quick way to open sea views. The island's history is kept in quiet places like Ryukyu Castle ruins, where old Ryukyu-era stonework overlooks fields and reef flats. In a country known for crowded rail lines, this corner of Japan feels shaped by boats, weather, and patient distance. Sea conditions matter here. Currents can turn calm water into one of the dangerous places for careless swimmers, especially beyond the reef. Local signs and tour operators tend to be conservative for good reason, and that caution is part of the island's rhythm. Getting around is easiest with a rental car or scooter, and buses are limited outside peak times. Staying connected is simple. Wi-Fi is common in small hotels and guest houses, and an eSIM works well for navigation. Out beyond the coast, Hatenohama stretches like a white ribbon, laid on clear, shallow turquoise, nothing but sand, sky, and the reef's pale edge. Hatenohama Beach feels less like a shoreline and more like a pale ribbon set down on open water. Off Kumejima in the Okinawa chain, it sits beyond any village streets or sea walls. Often described as Hatenohama Beach, Okinawa, Japan, it's actually a series of sandbars stretched across a shallow reef. From a distance, the sand looks almost weightless against the surrounding blues. Boats leave from Kumajima's ports when the sea cooperates, and the ride itself explains the geography. Coral flats, changing depth, then sudden clarity. At low tide, wide shallows spread out like a natural wading pool. There are no shops on the sand, so most visitors pack water, sun protection, and a light meal. Many guest houses on Kumejima can arrange the boat transfer, and mobile coverage is usually good enough with a local SIM or eSIM to confirm times. On calm days, the sea surface turns glassy and reveals dark seams of coral beneath the turquoise. Small fish gather near the reef edge, where the color drops into deeper cobalt. What stays with you is the uninterrupted sweep of white sandbar floating on a shallow reef lagoon with nothing built upon it.